Hello. This red box here animates using keyframes. So I've set up these keyframes and now the box moves according to the values in these keyframes. This is perfectly fine. You can export it and put it in the Plasma engine without any problems. However, there is also another way to animate objects, and that is called procedural animation. Let's have a look at this blue box. It also moves around. However, as you can see, there's not a single keyframe in the timeline for this object. That is because I assigned a so-called motion controller which dynamically controls the position value of this object. Up here you can find this little wheel icon called motion. If you click on it, under the rollout assign controller, you can choose if you want to assign a controller to the position, the rotation, or the scale of an object. In this case, I chose to assign a controller to the position, and from the list here, I chose noise position. If I now right-click on the position value, I can bring up the properties of this controller. This graph here controls the animation of the object. Let's just play it back. And if I now change some values for this graph, the animation updates dynamically in real time. Now, of course, you can see the advantages of this way of animating. You are very flexible. You don't have to go through all the keyframes and adjust their values, but you can just scrub some sliders here and the animation updates dynamically. The problem, however, is that older game engines don't understand this type of animation. They need keyframes for position and rotation to know what to do with the object. The process of transferring the procedural animation data in a keyframed data is called baking an animation, because you bake the information into the keyframes and you can't change them later on, so the dynamic aspect gets lost. Newer versions of 3D Studio Max have this feature built in. For 3D Max 7, programmers have written little scripts that do this task for you. In this case, I have installed one already, and I will show you how in just a moment. If you right-click on the box and go to any bake in the quad menu, little dialog pops up, asks you what do you want to bake, just the selected object, from where to where, just use the complete timeline, and let's bake the animation. Two things have happened. First, keyframes have appeared here in the timeline, so now you really have the information stored in keyframes. And secondly, the script also deleted the controller. If I right-click on position now, you can see the controller is no longer there. We are back to the standard position, rotation, and scale values. However, if I play this animation, it looks exactly as it did before with the dynamic data, but now the information is baked into the object. You can find this script on a site called scriptspot.com, and there in the profile of Andre Hotz, I will also put the link into the comment section of this video. He is an employee of Piranha Byte, and he wrote some scripts for 3D Studio Max that are very useful. Somewhere at the bottom of this page you will find the Animation Baker script. Just click here to download it, then switch to your 3D Studio Max installation folder, go to UI, Macro Scripts, and just paste the file that you've downloaded into this folder. When you start up Max now for the next time, you can go to Customize User Interface, and you can choose where you want to put this script. Now you can assign a keyboard shortcut to it or put it in the toolbar. I decided to put it in a quad menu. You can find the script under the group Main UI, category Piranha Byte, and there it is, Animation Baker. So I just dragged it over here into the quad menu. Here it is, and if I now right-click on any object, I can click any bake, it will bring up the dialog and I can bake the animation. Let's have a look at how this works in the production workflow. I have set up a little scene here. These are just two simple splines. That's my path 1 and path 2. And along these paths I want to animate this object. One animation should be the movement along this path, and the second animation should be the movement along this path. Now let's assume this is the object that I want to be visible in my final age, the one that you can see animating. I could, in theory, use this object, assign all the motion controllers to it, let it do the path animation here, and then bake the animation into this object. However, you can't undo these baking procedures, and that means if you have to change something later on, you would have to redo everything from scratch. That's why I strongly advise you to use a dummy first and animate the dummy, and then at the end assign this object to the dummy and then bake the animation. Let me show you what I mean. You could use a normal 3D Max dummy here in the Create panel, Helper, Dummy, but as I've already said in another tutorial, I don't like how dummies behave, so I use a normal box object. I call it dummy, but it's a normal box object. I click on Properties, Display as Box. However, because we are going to apply procedural animation to this object, and it is a normal box, we have to tell the Plasma exporter to ignore this object, otherwise Max will crash when we try to export this scene. So bring up the component manager and add a new ignore, and not only no show, but really ignore. Let's rename it to ignore object completely, and let's assign this to the object. That way we can use it in this scene, but it won't get exported. Let's assign a motion controller to this dummy. You find it here at the little wheel icon, assign controller, and we want to control the position of this object because we want to move it along these paths. So go to position and then click here, assign controller, and let's choose a path constraint. Here in this rollout it now asks us which paths we want to use. Let's add our path. This is the first one and this is the second one. And deselect add path. However, the movement is a little bit strange. Why is that? Because as you can see here, these paths have weights assigned to them, and right now the object tries to follow along both paths with a weight of 50. Let's change that. Let's change the weight of line 1 to 100 and of line 2 to 0. So now we really only move along the first path and the second one is ignored. That's okay. However, let's move this keyframe to 50 so that we take half the timeline to move along the first line. And now we need the second part of the animation, so let's click Auto Key, and at frame 50, at the end of this first frame, just select the first path and change its value and change it back to 100. This is just to set a keyframe here, and the same for path 2. Let's set a keyframe to this. Now, just move on one frame and change the weight of the second path now to 100 and the weight of the first path to 0. Now as you can see, the object now sticks to the second path. The problem only is that it has already finished moving along this path, so we need to set another keyframe. First, here at frame 50, where we are at the end of this path, let's set the keyframe to 100. And then at frame 51, let's change the percent along path back to 0. And then let's move to frame 100 and go back up to 100% along path. If you now look at our animation, you can see we have two parts. First we move along the first path, and then we jump to the beginning of the second path and move along that.